Good afternoon, everyone. Happy spring, and thanks for tuning in with us today over the lunch hour. My name is Mike Citrick, and I'm EVP for Advancement at DuPage Foundation. On behalf of my colleagues and our Board of Trustees, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this special webinar, which we're offering exclusively for our not-for-profit fund partners. We're delighted that you, members of your staff and volunteer leaders, are here with us. We have an excellent program lined up with an outstanding presenter. Before we get to that, just let me share a few housekeeping notes and a little about DuPage Foundation for those of you who are joining us for the first time. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available along with its slides. After the program, we ask that you please complete a brief electronic evaluation, as your responses will aid us in planning future programs. Please feel free to contact us at the address provided in the chat with any questions about materials or the evaluations. Those will go to Kate Balswitz, our Assistant Director of Donor Services, who will be joining us later in the webinar to field your questions. And with regard to questions, we do invite you to submit them throughout the program utilizing the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will address them during the question segment near the end of the hour. And now a quick word on DuPage Foundation. DuPage Foundation has been serving our community for nearly 35 years, and we are DuPage County's philanthropic leader. We're a public charity, and we're one of nearly 750 community foundations across the country. You can think of us as the engine that drives charitable giving throughout DuPage, and we do that by helping our residents do a world of good in our own backyard. Specifically, we focus on helping people and organizations give efficiently and effectively to the causes they love, providing vital support to our community's not-for-profits, all of you through our grant making and various initiatives, and then fostering key partnerships to address critical issues affecting our county. Since our inception, we've granted more than $65 million on behalf of our community and beyond. And locally, our grants are doing some amazing things to address the needs of our most vulnerable neighbors and to raise the quality of life for all of our residents. In addition to the foundation's work as a grant maker, convener, and charitable conduit for donors, we're honored to work closely with your organizations as stewards of your endowments and other charitable investment funds. Raising outright gifts to support current programs and operations is critical, as we all know, but so is planting the seeds for future growth and impact. That's why endowments play such a vital part in helping not-for-profits ensure their long-term sustainability. Offering a planned giving program is one of the most valuable investments that you can make to your organization. While not all donors have the ability to be as generous as they'd like to be during life, planned giving provides them with an opportunity to create a lasting legacy and achieve philanthropy that's truly transformational. As you may have noted in the invitation to today's webinar, we're starting to experience an unprecedented transfer of wealth that will take place over the next decade. Right here in DuPage County, more than $53 billion is expected to change hands. Just imagine for a moment what good could be done if your organizations in our community, or for your organizations in our community, is if just as little as 5% of that were directed to permanent endowments. That would be a whopping $2.6 billion that could be invested and generate annual support for impact, sustainability, and growth. That's why we're so delighted to support you in strengthening your organization's approach to planned giving with today's program, the top 10 legacy fundraising strategies for scientific research. Presenting for us is one of our county's leading authorities on legacy fundraising, Dr. Russell James, who's joining us. Welcome, Dr. James.
Great to be here. Thank you.
For those of you unfamiliar with Dr. James, he's a JD, a PhD, a CFP, and currently serves as the chaired professor for the Department of Personal Financial Planning and the director of the graduate program in charitable financial planning at Texas Tech University. He has an extremely distinguished bio, but in particular, I want to note that he's authored several books on fundraising and charitable planning, many of which he makes for free, which I think he's going to talk to you about later. Has published more than 75 peer-reviewed articles and has been featured on all sorts of news outlets, from the Wall Street Journal to Chronicle Philanthropy and more. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. James here.
Okay, thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate that. So Mike mentioned the various books. I'm going to go ahead and put into the chat links to free copies of all of those. I give away all of my stuff for free. And as you see on the slide there, if you're interested in this sort of thing, please do connect with me on LinkedIn. I will send you an inappropriately long response that will give you links to not only all my books and videos, but also slide sets like these, academic papers that look at major gifts of assets and planned giving. So please do connect with me on LinkedIn if you're interested in that sort of thing. And also take a look at the chat if you want links to any of at least those 6 books that you might be interested in. So this is one of my favorite presentations. And one of the reasons is this is really an opportunity for me to talk about, well, to talk about everything, to talk about the whole world of results when it comes to legacy fundraising, plan giving fundraising, whatever you want to call it, when people are making gifts in wills. And so I'm going to summarize all of this down into 10 principles. Now, you notice I've sort of put these principles on stone tablets. That's because I'm used to speaking to audiences that have to listen to me. Otherwise, I give them an F. And so, I tend to be very dictatorial in my statements, but I understand that's not our circumstance here today. So just think of these as suggestions or ideas, and you can ignore the fact that I put them on stone tablets. So before we jump in to the very practical approaches to legacy fundraising, first, we're going to start with theory. No, this is not just your penalty for asking a professor to come speak, although that comes with the territory. What I'm suggesting to you is, look, we're going to get to the very practical. Do this, don't do that. But before we get to that, I want to suggest to you that it's helpful to understand a little bit of the why. What is it that drives these decisions? Why do we want to communicate in this way versus that way? Okay, so let me take just a moment to justify. Why do we want to talk about theory first? Why not just get to the do this and not that? One of the reasons is that theory-based strategies are more flexible than a list of do's and don'ts. You see, the idea is that new techniques can emerge when circumstances change. And if there's anything we've learned over the last 2 years, it's circumstances can really change. But if you understand the underlying principles, you can adopt your approaches to new circumstances, to new media, to new projects, whatever the case may be. And this is especially true when we're working in a field like legacy giving, where the measurements for success may actually take a long time before they come to fruition. Theory becomes much more important there. Hey, if we're just sending out immediate response online appeals, we can figure out pretty quickly what works and what doesn't. But legacy fundraising, that's a lifetime charitable investment decision. And so we need to be more focused on theory, because we can't just simply experiment and throw things up against the wall and wait for the results to come in. Also, theory-based techniques are more helpful because you can adjust them to your particular organization, your particular media. So let's jump into it. Well, we have to deal with this reality, regardless of how clever we get with the terminology, gifts that mature and all that sort of thing. We are having conversations about the donor's death. And for many people, that can be an uncomfortable process. Well, it turns out that there is an entire field of experimental research that's literally devoted to the topic of how does it change people's values and preferences when you remind them that they're going to die. I kid you not. It is called terror management theory. No, I didn't make that name up. That is a real name. But because of that, we have literally hundreds of experimental results that show how people react to these kinds of mortality reminders, like talking about estate planning. And we can summarize all of that up into two different types of reactions, or two stages of defenses. The first stage defense is simply avoidance. I'm going to deny that or stay away from those reminders. When that doesn't work, then the second stage defense is the pursuit of symbolic immortality. That's the idea that, look, I get it, I'm going to disappear, but some part of my identity, my family, my achievements, my community, my values will continue to exist after I'm gone. This is a form of autobiographical heroism, and that becomes very attractive once people are thinking about their own end of life. So what do these two things look like in practice? Well, avoidance. Look, if you're trying to get people to complete estate planning, you'll see all sorts of expressions of avoidance. That might be distraction. I'm too busy to think about that right now, or that doesn't really apply to me, or those worries are overstated, or oh, I'll get to that later, or simply I'm going to stay away from that, plan giving, estate planning seminar. The other response is the pursuit of symbolic immortality, the idea that some part of my identity, some part of myself will persist after death. Maybe this is my name, my family, my community, my achievements, my values, my goals. Those will get some type of permanence beyond my life. One of the reasons why endowments are so attractive in this kind of giving. One of the things that we have learned from experimental research is that as personal mortality awareness grows, the desire for investing in long-term social impact becomes relatively more attractive. Again, this is the idea that something reflecting the person's identity, their life story, their community, their values will live beyond them. We also see from experimental research that death reminders will increase support for one surviving in-group, whoever your people are, and the values of that particular community. All right, you've done it. You've survived all of the talk about academic theory. So now let's get a bit more practical. And before we jump into the do's and don'ts, here's one really important thing to notice. This is from a UC Davis Law Review article using nationally representative data of adults over age 50 that we now can see from a nationally representative setting exactly what happens to current giving after people add charity to their estate plan. So what you're looking at here is the same group of people, both before in the white bars on the left and after in the black bars on the right, they have added charity to their estate plan. And what you see is that after people add charity to their estate plan, their current giving goes up about 77%. And that higher level of current giving is sustained 2 years later, 4, 6, even 8 years later. So this is a sustained transformation that takes place once charity is added to an estate plan. Now, one of the drivers of this dramatic transformation may be that for most people, the first time that they ever commit to a charitable gift of their wealth, not just their disposable income, is when they commit to that gift in their estate plan. Once you make a donor's wealth donation relevant, that's transformational for their future giving. So this is not just a matter of getting into the estate plan because someday they may die. It is a matter of making their wealth donation relevant and its impact on current giving. So let's jump into it. The first suggestion is this: if you want a larger audience, don't lead with death. This is the spoonful of sugar that makes the medicine go down. If we recognize that these personal mortality topics are subconsciously aversive, we want to sidestep that aversion by leading in with non-death related topics. Now, how might we do that? Well, perhaps instead of giving a charitable estate planning presentation, we would just give a presentation on tax smart giving. We would talk about some current giving tips, giving appreciated assets instead of cash, for example, but also add in some planned giving tips. Any of that IRA money that the kids inherit, they got to pay income taxes on it. Any of that you name the charity as a beneficiary of, no income taxes. We can talk about what the organization is doing, but also include stories of planned donors who will be funding it. I like to share the story. When I started out in planned giving, right after I graduated from law school, I was working for a religiously affiliated college. And I did what my predecessor had done, which was to go into supporting churches and give a presentation on estate planning. And let me tell you, as a young lawyer, I put together a fantastic seminar on estate planning. And both of the people who showed up for it agreed it was a great presentation. But I had to learn that if I wanted to get a larger audience, I needed to change my topic. And so in that case, I changed it to Christians and the law, and we would talk about religious liberties issues. And then along the way, talk about some stewardship or estate planning issues. I not only got a much larger audience, but my rate of sign up to have these estate planning meetings was just as high in the second scenario. Or this is often a really uncomfortable situation for fundraisers who are not used to asking for these kinds of gifts. You know, they'll say something to me like, how am I supposed to do this? Am I supposed to, sit across the table from this lady and say, you're looking a little old. You got a lot of stuff around here. You're not going to need that stuff when you're dead. We could use that stuff when you're dead, right? I mean, how do we even have these conversations? Well, if you're uncomfortable about this, and by the way, I've got a whole hour-long presentation on how to ask these questions, but let me just give you the simplest, softest way to do it. I like to call it the 4S method for 3 stories and shut up. How might this sound like if we wanted to ask for this kind of a gift? Well, let's suppose I was a fundraiser for Texas Tech and you were an alumnus. At some point in the conversation, what's going to come up is, hey, what's new at Texas Tech University? And I might share stories that say something like, well, we're really excited about our new basketball coach. People were thinking we were going to go downhill after University of Texas stole our basketball coach, but we sure had a better year this year than they did. So things are looking up. A lot of new construction on campus too. We're over 40,000 students now, if you can believe that. You come in the west side, you'll see where a bunch of those new buildings are. Oh, and Mary Smith did a neat thing. Now, did you know Mary? She graduated 2 years before you. No? Well, Mary spent her career helping other people get their finances in order. And she recently signed a new will that one day will endow a permanent scholarship for our financial planning students. That's the 4th step. You've got to shut up. Now, if you've reached somebody at a point in their lives when they're interested in continuing this conversation, you've given them an opening so that they can continue that conversation and it may progress. If you've reached somebody at a point in their lives when they're not interested in continuing this conversation, you may hear some response like, now that new building, where would I park if I wanted to see those, right? And you might think, I tried it, didn't work because I didn't close the gift. But in fact, what we have found is that the most powerful message that you can share in terms of changing people's attitudes about including a gift in their will is to share a living donor story about another donor who has included a gift in their will that reflects their life story. And you've really accomplished that here. Another example of oblique communication, I was working with an organization and they said they had sent out an appeal letter for gifts and wills. They really wanted to go after gifts and wills, and they were used to sending out monthly appeal letters, requests for gifts. So they just sent out an appeal letter for a gift and a will. And let me tell you, it very strongly led with death. And then we had the standard response cards for these. You know, I've already included your organization with a gift in my will, or please contact me about my upcoming death. It didn't actually say that, but we all know that's what it really means, right? Well, here's the thing. With this appeal that very strongly led with death, the organization sent out 35,000 of them, and they got back nothing. Now, for those of you who don't do the sophisticated statistical analysis like I do in my econometric academic research, I'll translate that for you. That's not a very good response rate. Now, here's the important part of this story. That same organization later sent out a 1-page survey. Started with questions about how you've gotten connected to the organization. And here's various projects we do. Which of these are most important to you? And then towards the end, ask the exact same question. Which of the following gifts might you think about consider doing in the next 3 months? Gift of check, gift of credit card, gift in a will, or I've already done that, and various other gifts. They were asking for exactly the same information, but they actually got back a 22% response rate. When they led with death, they got back nothing. When they instead led with connections to the organization, which was what's most important to you about our projects, and then only along the way mentioned the death-related question, they got back a much higher response rate. And in fact, they mailed again a year later to the non-responders and got another 19% response rate from them. Or I love this story from the Journal of Gift Planning, where an organization put on a plan giving seminar and people didn't show up. So they hired a consultant and said, consultant, why is nobody coming to our plan giving seminars? And so the consultant said, I don't know, let's have a focus group. So they brought in a bunch of donors, get them around the table and say, folks, we need help. We're putting on these plan giving seminars. People aren't showing up, not sure why. We'd like to talk to them about things like charitable gift annuities and how they can do. A hand goes up in the back. A gift of what? Oh, a gift annuity. That's where you make a gift to the organization. You get back lifetime income, so you don't have to worry about donating too much. Also get an immediate tax deduction along with that. And we didn't know if we should get too technical and talk about charitable remainder trust, but maybe that's too much. Again, hand goes up. A remaining what? Oh, a charitable remainder trust. That's where you take your asset, you set it aside. You can sell it with no capital gains taxes, take income off of it for your life. You get an immediate tax deduction, and anything left over at the end of life goes to the charity. So here's the important part. The organization got planned gifts the next day from people who had been in the focus group. And I love the conclusion of the article. They say, like scientists who discover a cure unexpectedly, we had inadvertently found our answer where we least expected it. The best venue to teach people about planned giving was not a workshop or a seminar on planned giving, but a focus group on why nobody will come to workshops or seminars on planned giving. That's the idea of not leading with death. You can think of that in terms of death insurance. How is death insurance sold? Well, of course, we don't call it death insurance, even though it is. It's like fire or flood insurance. We call it life insurance, but it's almost never sold by itself. It's almost always sold in combination with other investment products, what we might call universal or whole life, so that I don't have to begin the conversation with, you're going to die, right? Let's talk about that. Instead, I can begin the conversation with planning for your retirement, planning for your kids' college education. And only along the way, I might say, now, if something happened to you, did you still want your kids to go to college? Oh, okay, well, let's put some protection in there for that. Notice we're engaging in that oblique communication. We see this in other experimental research. For example, one looking at annuities. It found that people were much more willing to purchase an annuity that paid a certain amount each year you live, but not willing to purchase an annuity that paid the same amount each year you live until you die. When we use the death language, people are not interested in purchasing it. And statistically, that drop in interest was fully mediated by change in death-related thoughts. So we lead with death, we get avoidance. Avoidance suggests we want to avoid that reality of our own personal mortality. So we've been talking about how to communicate to people so that they move away from, I don't want to think about it, to, yeah, that's a good idea. But we also need to be able to move people from yes to now. In other words, we've got to deal with this question. If I'm not going to die tomorrow, why not deal with all of this later? So we need to get creative at attaching a non-death related negative outcome to putting it off until later. So what might that look like? Well, that might look like something simple of, hey, our campaign to reach 100 planned gifts and wills or trusts ends in 3 months. Won't you consider joining these others? You could do it later, but you'd be left out of the group, don't get to come to the celebration dinner, whatever, don't get to influence others by your example, whatever the case may be. Whatever it is that you're offering for anyone who signs up for an appointment tonight, and you can put it off till later, but you don't get that, or simply people really take their cue from leaders like you. Your action would motivate many of them to act. You could do it later, but you don't become a good example in that case. And we're perfectly willing to admit that other people are going to die. So we need to be out front and being an example for them because it benefits the organization. Or this, we can simply say, hey, to show a strong leadership commitment in this planned giving push, we want to announce our group or board participation levels at the fall banquet. Can we count you in? I commit to complete an estate plan with a gift to the organization within 6 months. Yes, no, or already completed. Notice we're making that very soft. We're one of the forms of avoidance is delay. We're baking delay right into the question, saying within 6 months. Yeah, I'll get around to it in 6 months, which then, of course, allows us to follow up. really appreciate your commitment to make this gift. Can I check back in a month to see how the planning process is going? Well, now I've got to finish this up, even if it's just going online and naming the organization as a beneficiary on my IRA, which I can do in about 10 minutes. If I don't get that done, I'm violating my pledge. The second suggestion is to emphasize lasting social impact. Now, I've been talking about if you want a larger audience, don't lead with death. That does not mean don't ever lead with death. There's a couple of times that you actually do want to lead with death. One of those is if you've got a captive audience. If you've got people in front of you, it's okay to go ahead and lead with death, because if people can't engage in avoidance, what's the next alternative? Well, that's the pursuit of symbolic immortality, that lasting social impact, which is what you as a charitable organization provide for them. So you may actually want to ramp up their death reminders once they're a captive audience, or you can lead with death if you only want the low-hanging fruit, the people that are wanting to plan right now. That is a smaller group, but they're much more motivated. Now, in estate planning, we always want to emphasize lasting social impact. In other words, what becomes really attractive here are things that live a long time. Dynasty trusts, private family foundations, endowments, other long-term plans become very attractive. So if we're talking estate planning, we say, hey, without planning, that's just a big pile of money for the heirs to quickly blow, and that violates the client's values. With planning, we can make a lasting impact expressing the client's values. So again, this is the idea that I want some part of my identity to continue. Long-term impact becomes very important, and it becomes particularly important when it comes to charitable gifts. Now, let me show you a really cool experiment that demonstrated this. So in this experiment, there were 4 groups. Half of them were reminded of their own mortality before they made a charitable giving decision. The other half were not. They had to be reminded of something unpleasant, so they were just reminded of dental surgery, which is unpleasant, but doesn't make us think about dying. So here was the difference. For half of the people, so everybody had the opportunity to give to the same charity, as a poverty relief charity. For half of the people, that organization was described as meeting the immediate needs of people. For the other half of folks, the organization was described as creating lasting improvements that would benefit people in the future. So notice for the normal group that was not reminded of their death, it was much better to describe the organization as meeting the immediate needs of people. More than 2.5 times, the gift size was more than 2.5 times larger for that description. But for the group that was reminded of their mortality, that now reverses. And now you get almost 4 times as large of a gift if you are using this language of creating lasting improvements that would benefit people in the future. So what this shows us is that the current gift message is not necessarily the same as the estate gift message. When it comes to estate gifts, people are very attracted to permanence, even if all we're doing is changing the language that we're using to describe the impact of that organization. Now, beyond language, we can certainly go further by actually structuring lasting gifts. Endowments, which the community foundation can help you out with, maybe naming a building, a scholarship fund, whatever it might be. And these lasting gifts to stable organizations are particularly compelling for estate gifts. So we do want to be thinking about ways in which we can develop permanent giving opportunities, especially for our mid-level donors in estate gifts, because those are going to be so attractive in this space. In fact, in one published experiment, we found that if you want to encourage another death-related gift, which is a memorial gift in honor of a deceased loved one, the problem with these gifts is they all come in, but nobody ever makes a second one. So we were investigating, how do you trigger that second gift in people, and what was the most powerful way to trigger a second gift in memory of a loved one? It was adding a permanence goal. In this case, instead of if the total gifts that had been given in honor of that person exceeded $10,000, that fund would become a perpetual scholarship fund. And that became super attractive, intended to increase the propensity to give and the giving amount by 150%. Again, whenever we're in a death-related context, permanence becomes very attractive. The third suggestion is to present a social norm default. Now, that's the idea that people like me make gifts like this. So when we look at death-related decisions, for example, the decision to make a organ donation, what we see is that people are very influenced by the default or the social norm. So for example, countries with opt-in systems, you check the box to say, yes, I want to opt into organ donation, have much lower effective consent rates than countries where you check the box to opt out of organ donation. Again, it's because that default or that social norm is so powerful in a death-related context. Now, this applies very directly to charitable estate planning. In this experiment, 3,000 people going through their normal estate planning process were randomly assigned to one of three groups. One got the standard estate planning questions with no reference to charity. One got an additional question, would you like to leave any money to charity in your will? And the third group got that question with a social norm statement. Many of our customers like to leave money to charity in their will. And notice what happened to the propensity to actually include charity in their real will documents. Just asking the question more than doubled the share of people who did so. And asking it with a social norm statement more than tripled the share of people who included charity in their estate plans. Do you understand how fluid this decision is? When you can triple the share of people who are including a gift by using a single sentence, you're dealing with a very fluid decision there. It shows you how important it is to be top of the mind right at the point of decision making in these kinds of decisions, because they are highly fluid, especially among those who are childless. By the way, that study was done in the UK. We tested that same phrase here with the US audience and found the same effect. Adding that phrase, many people like to leave a gift to charity in their will, increased people's interest in making that kind of a gift. And you also notice here, whenever we use formal technical terms to describe any kind of plan giving instrument, interest in making the gift goes down. We need to use simple language and simple words to describe these gifts. So here's another example of setting a social norm. This was a series of tests where we were testing a charitable gift annuity and the different messages. And so first we tested, should you talk about what you can do with a charitable gift annuity, or should you instead talk about what Sarah had done with a charitable gift annuity? Well, it turns out that when we tested people by randomly assigning them to these descriptions, it was better to talk about what Sarah had done. So then we showed them a picture of Sarah. And for this group, our results got worse. So that made us think, what's going on? What's the problem with the donor picture? Is it photos in general, the donor's age? What's the problem? So of course, you know, being a researcher, we tested a bunch more Sarahs with the identical language. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a box around the best performing Sarah based upon the age of the person answering the question. So notice the importance that the example is showing that people like me make gifts like this. Now, we also tested that against just a generic photo or text only, and it turns out that similar age donor photos did better, dissimilar age ones did worse. But beyond age matching, the important principle here was found by some more statistical analysis, because this association was completely explained statistically by the answer to one question. How much do you identify with Sarah, from she is not at all like me to she is a lot like me? If the person felt like Sarah was someone who was like them, they were much more interested in that gift. So again, the message is people like me make gifts like this. We see this in another experiment. This was a fun experiment that was conducted on university students in Sweden. They were all asked for a small gift to a well-known Swedish charity. Some were simply asked for the gift, and about 40% made it. Others were asked for the gift, and we're told that 73% of university students in Sweden who were asked for the gift made one, and that bumped up the willingness to make the gift to about 60%. However, for the third group, they were told that 73% of students at that university who were asked for this gift made one, and that bumped up the share who would make gifts to about 80%. And so you see, again, social norms, that is the idea that people like me make gifts like this, are very powerful. The fourth suggestion is to advance the donor's life story. Now, some of you may know that among the research that I do on charitable decision-making, it includes, yes, this. We do stick people in brain scanners and have them do their estate planning or make decisions about charitable bequest, giving, or volunteering. In this particular study, we wanted to learn about what was different about the charitable bequest decision as compared to other kinds of charitable giving or volunteering decisions. For any neuroimagers in the audience, yes, this is the results we found. This is published peer-reviewed research. I will translate that for you. When people were making these decisions, they were engaged in visualized autobiography. And in fact, the greater amount of visualized autobiography activation that we got with these decisions, the more likely the person was to say, yes, I want to include that organization in my will. Now, it turns out you can get to this same result even without using a multi-million-dollar MRI machine. Dr. Claire Rowley in the UK, a colleague and co-author of mine, she wanted to also learn why do people pick the particular charities that they pick to go into their will documents. She didn't use a brain scanner. She simply asked them in-depth qualitative interviews. And from her dissertation, her summary sentence was this: when discussing which charities they had chosen to remember, there was a clear link, with the life narratives of many respondents. It's all about the life story. So this then led us to, is there some way that we can trigger this in the way we're describing the gift? And it turns out, yes, there is. In fact, excuse me, we found, as close as you might come to a magic phrase, that whenever we attach this to the end of a description of any kind of a planned gift, it dramatically increased people's interest in making that gift. So again, here, instead of just asking about make a gift to charity in your will, we asked about make a gift to charity in your will to support causes that have been important in your life. If I ask someone about that, the way that I am phrasing that description causes them to engage in life review. Oh, causes that have been important in my life. What causes have been important in my life? And that process, we know from the neuroimaging, is what precedes the decision to include charity in the estate plan. And as a result, this is actually the best performing phrase we've ever tested. And by the way, we tested dozens of these phrases with over 10,000 different participants. The best way to describe a bequest gift that generated the most interest in making it. Also, by the way, as I mentioned before, in another test, living donor stories outperformed all other messages for 40 out of 40 charities tested. It was always the best performing message. It's about the donor's life story. So we need to ask about, is this cause or organization an important part of my life story? Start with, tell me about your connection to the organization. We actually want to have gifts that advance the donor's hero story. One of the things we know from experimental research is that death reminders actually increase attraction to personal heroism. That idea that something reflecting a person's life story, their community or values, will live beyond them. And here's where we get the reality that large gifts come with instructions. It is the instructions with the gift that make it compelling. That's what tends to reflect the donor's values, life story, and identity. This is particularly true when it comes to estate gifts. And no, this is not a new phenomenon. In fact, in 2 studies of wills from the 1800s in America, charitable bequests were restricted in only 14% of small cash gifts, 58% of real estate or large cash gifts, and even 70% of gifts of a share of the entire estate. Not a new phenomenon here. And in fact, in experiments in the lab, we learned that gift restrictions do make gifts larger in experiments if we allow people to put instructions with their money. By the way, what is the most extreme version of gift instructions? It is, of course, found in foundations, funds, and charitable trusts. These can involve pages of detailed instructions controlling the gift for decades or even generations. And, well, what do we see? Among decedents in 2004 and 2007, with estates of 5 million or more, this is back when the exemption levels were lower, the share of charitable dollars going to private family foundations was 70% and 78%. Respectively in those years. If you want to get charitable bequest dollars, this is your competition. You need to be thinking in terms of what endowment opportunities are you offering to the donors, because this is your competition and currently you're losing. So you need to provide that same kind of value proposition. If you want to work with the community foundation, that's a great way to do it, but this is your competition for the dollars. By the way, one of the issues that comes up is along these same lines, if somebody has indicated that they have included you in their estate plan, what if they don't tell you how much it is? How can we learn the amount and how can we make it larger? Well, there is a magic question for doing that. It might go something like this. Somebody says they've included your organization with the gift in their will, and you say, wow, thank you very much for that. That really means a lot. I mean, for you to treat our organization like a family member and put us into the estate plan, that's really powerful. Thank you for that. Let me ask you this. Have you ever thought about how you would like your gift to be used? Maybe they haven't, and say, well, the reason I ask, there was another donor, and what she decided to do in her plan, let's say I'm fundraiser for Texas Tech, is she was really interested in a particular area of cancer research. And so she created a permanent endowed professorship named after her mother, actually. That means there will always be a professor doing research on that very specific area permanently. Now, those started about $3 million. And I didn't know if that might be something. Oh, okay. So you're looking at a gift not quite at that level. Well, many of our donors like to create a scholarship fund. Those will start at just $50,000, and they're not only named, but you can specifically have those for particular areas of study or people from particular backgrounds that fit what might be interesting to you. Okay, you see what we're doing here is that we're now giving reasons for the larger gift. Those reasons have price tags with them. That's how we get beyond the small pat on the head gift to the actual major life investment gift, is to create that gift that advances the donor's life story. The fifth suggestion is to encourage tribute gifts and wills. One of the things that we learned from these in-depth qualitative interviews is that oftentimes people would include a gift to a charity, but the gift, although it was to a charity, it was actually for a loved one. This is a UK study, so you'll see UK charities here. I supported things like cancer research because people I've known have died, an animal charity as well. I had a couple of cats. I mean, I'm a dog person, so I don't really get that, but I know there's people like that. And so we decided to take this and say, hey, is there some way that we can actually trigger this intentionally? So here's what we did. We first asked people about their willingness to leave a bequest gift to a particular organization. And then with a little over 4,500 respondents, we would then ask them about family member connections, in some cases a deceased connection, in some cases a living connection with that kind of cause. If so, state your relationship to them and write at least 25 words describing their interest and connection to the cause. And then we ask them the bequest question again. They've already answered this bequest question with regard to making any kind of a gift, but now we ask them that question with regard to making a bequest gift in honor of that family member. And what we found was a dramatic increase in the percentage of people who said, yes, I would like to include a charity. And if they had a connection with that family member that we reminded them of, a dramatic spike in their interest in including a gift in a will. By the way, you can do this in a very simple way if you don't want to go through this whole conversational reminder process. If you ever happen to have one of the standard response cards, I've included your organization with a gift in my will. All you got to do is just add a line. My gift is in checkbox honor of, checkbox memory of, person and relationship. Now, here's the reality. In experiments, just knowing that this is possible increases the willingness to make this kind of a gift for about 1 out of 4 people. So it is very powerful, just to mention this as a possibility. The 6th suggestion, which I've already mentioned, is to use family words, not formal words. When we use stories and simple words, that triggers a social frame of mind, which encourages sharing. When we use formal, legal, or contract terms, that triggers a market exchange, competitive frame of mind that does not encourage sharing. So when we get into all of this plan giving stuff, make sure you're not using that technical language, certainly not leading with it. Think of it this way. Would you have said this in a normal conversation with your grandmother? If the answer is no, be careful. You might be using that formal, legal, or contract terms that decreases willingness to share. You've already seen this result where we get much higher level of interest, almost doubling it, if we don't use the formal term bequest. But we can see this in other contexts. Here where people were randomly assigned to one of 2 descriptions of a charitable remainder trust. The only difference was one began with the phrase make a gift. The other one began with the phrase make a transfer of assets. And notice we more than double the share of people who are interested now when we simply use the language make a gift rather than make a transfer of assets. Here is another test with a charitable gift annuity. Identical descriptions, except one begins with make a gift and the other begins with this lovely phrase, enter into a contract with a charity where you transfer your cash or property. Why did we use that phrase? This is not my phrase. I pulled this from a charitable gift annuity brochure that's been used by hundreds of nonprofits across the country. It came from a consulting company that published these brochures, and I thought that seems like fairly formal language. And indeed, now we more than double the share of people who are interested in the gift if we get rid of that formal language. Then we did another series of tests. In this series of tests, we randomly assigned people to one of 2 descriptions of, in this case, a charitable remainder trust. The only difference was in one case, we called the charitable remainder trust a charitable remainder trust. Yes, just using that language in our initial description of the gift dropped people's interest in that kind of a planned gift substantially. Now, I've blown up that extra part that we put in there. The text was all the same size in the actual experiment itself. We also did this where we randomly assigned people to 2 different descriptions, to one of 2 different descriptions of a charitable gift annuity. And you notice when we use that financial, legal, technical term to introduce the gift, we reduce people's interest dramatically. And then finally, for this one, for a remainder interest deed, we see the exact same effect. And by the way, if you don't know what the remainder interest deed is, you can just follow that link that I put into the chat there for visual plan giving, or just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll send you links to all of my videos that include a series of 65 short animated videos on plan giving, so you can kind of go through learning about that. So that brings up another question. What is the best front door phrase to get people to read about plan giving information? So we asked people this question in a different study. Suppose you're viewing the website of a charity representing a cause that's important in your life. In addition to the Donate Now button, the following buttons appear on the website and tell us your interest in clicking on the button to read that corresponding information. Well, it turns out people did not want to read about planned giving. They didn't want to read about gift planning either, but they sure did want to read about other ways to give smarter. Notice we get a 5 or 6-fold increase in people who say, I definitely want to read about that. Then we ask them, what are you expecting to see when you click on these buttons, right? And we ask them that with regard to 12 different types of plan giving information, whether it be estate taxes or TODs on IRAs or bank accounts or living trusts, wills. And by the way, instead of TOD, we called it a death beneficiary of your life insurance or IRA or bank account. Don't ever use that language. We were intentionally using this death language to see if they're going to freak out, right? Well, here's the weird part that we found. People were much more interested in reading about other ways to give smarter. But when we asked them what they expected to see, they were just as likely to expect to read all 12 types of that planned giving information. In fact, more likely than the term planned giving. So the difference wasn't that they were expecting something different. It's just what we called it made a big difference. Really, it comes down to this. Do we communicate with donor language or insider language? When we communicate with donor language, things are going to go much better. The 7th suggestion is don't count it and forget it. This is from nationally representative data. And you can see here, this is the 10-year retention of having a charitable estate component. And we've got a remarkably consistent result here again and again and again. Every time we look at folks who have a charitable estate component, who then are answering that same question 10 years later, 55% will still have charity in their estate plan. That is quite a bit of fluidity, though. And in fact, here we can see what happens among those who have included charity in their estate plan and report that for 2 years in a row. And we can see that changing over time. So we've got a lot of fluidity in this charitable estate planning decision. What do we do with that? Well, I want to suggest to you that the approach of count it and forget it, which a lot of charities like to take, doesn't work. We've got to remember that the bequest commitment is a beginning of a process that may eventually lead to money for the organization. It's not the end of the process. It's not the end unless we're actually converting them to irrevocable instruments like all the other stuff we do in planned giving. Now, charitable plans signed earlier do produce larger gifts if they stay in or if they later return. The 8th suggestion is this. Most important one, perhaps, of everything else we've been looking at today, and that is don't go radio silent at the critical moment. So when do these charitable components of estate plans change? Well, here are the top 10 statistical factors that predict when a person will add charity to their estate plan. Approaching death, becoming a widow or widower, diagnosis with cancer, decline in self-reported health, divorce, diagnosis with heart problems, stroke, first grandchild, increasing assets, or increasing charitable giving. For the most part, what triggers the addition of a charitable component is family structure changes or death becomes real, some sort of a negative diagnosis or condition. Now let's reverse that around and see what are the top 10 factors that predict when charitable plans are dropped. This list should look eerily familiar. Decline in self-reported health, approaching death, becoming a widow or widower, divorce, diagnosis with cancer, heart problems, stroke, first child, first grandchild, or exiting home ownership, which often relates to going into a nursing home. What does that mean? Again, plans destabilize when death feels near or family structure changes. This instability in planning then leads to either a new plan that doesn't have a charitable component in it or a new plan that now does have a charitable component in it. We see this in data from other countries. In a 5% sample of Australian probate records, 31% of charitable wills were signed within 2 years of death. 60% were signed within 5 years of death. Now, that shows when the final document was signed, but actually in the US data, it's longitudinal. So we're tracking those people across their entire lives from age 50 and beyond. And so we can see not just their final document, but we can see when charity was added to that plan. And what we see is that the majority of all charitable estates that actually transfer dollars to charity at death, and just about half of all of the dollars gifted, came from estates in which at some point in the last 2 to 5 years prior to the end of life, there was no charitable component in the estate plan. So there is a lot of end of life fluidity in the charitable component of an estate plan. Many charities go radio silent right at the most important point of decision. What we see from all of the data is the last 3 to 5 years of life is a period of high fluidity for the charitable component of the estate plan. It is also a period of time in which people who are actually going to transfer dollars to charity at death, they stop giving and they certainly stop volunteering. So what do charities do? They do exactly the wrong thing. They stop communicating with those lifelong friends because they only communicate based upon recency of donation. That's going to guarantee that you're going to go radio silent right at the most critical point of decision making. If instead we simply pick a magic age, call it 75 if you have the money. If you don't, maybe call it 78. And once we have a lifelong friend who reaches that magic age, we never stop communicating with them. We expect that their giving is going to stop. We expect that their volunteering is going to stop, and that's okay. Another study looked at 10 large Australian charities and looked at 700 known decedents who were in those charities' legacy societies. That is, they had confirmed to the charity they had a planned bequest gift. 65% of those cases actually generated dollars. In 35%, actually 35% is a minimum, so at least 35% of those cases, there were no gift generated at death. Now, some organizations did dramatically better than others. The overall gift loss rate was a minimum of 35%, but different organizations' lost gift rates varied from 17% all the way up to 60%. What was the difference? Well, here's an example. The average loss rate was 24% when the charity had at least one communication with the decedent within 2 years of death. If you had no communication, you're now doubling your loss rate. And in fact, that gap, because of the way that we collected the data, is probably much larger than doubling. So what does that mean? It means if you have a legacy society, that's fine, but legacy societies don't work unless you do. 1 in 4 people who had confirmed the presence of a bequest gift to the charity did not receive a single communication of any type from the charity during their final 2 years of life. These are the biggest charities in the country, and they're doing it exactly the wrong way. What does that mean? Don't ignore your oldest supporters. And by the way, when I say old, I do mean old because wealthy people die old and wealthy bequest donors die even older. So for example, when we look at nationally representative Australian data, the age at will signing by the share of total charitable bequest dollars transferred, 76% of the dollars are transferred by wills signed in the 80s, 90s, or older. Are you interested in wills signed before age 70? That's great. That's 13% of the dollars, right? So we are looking at a much older age where half of all charitable bequest dollars came from decedents in an earlier study, age 86 and older, or in the Australian study, age 90 and older. So somewhere around the late 80s is you're only going to have received half of your dollars because of that. So just keep in mind, plans destabilize as death approaches. And we see this from all of the data, gives us exactly the same answer. So for those 75 and above with lifetime connections, we've got to somehow stay top of the mind. However it is that we may do that, because Two things to keep in mind. Remember the other research results from the 3,000 people that were randomly assigned to the different groups, how fluid that charitable decision is. It's because if you are not top of the mind, they may simply not think of your organization when they're going through this estate planning process. And once you get in the will, there is no automatic carryover. That is not how the majority of estate planning attorneys work. If you bring into me an old will document as an estate planning attorney, I am not going to charge you for the time it would take me to read through that document, because we're getting ready to revoke it unless there's some capacity issue that we're dealing with. I've got automated systems set up where I'm just going to be asking you about what you own, who your family is, and what your goals are, and we're going to go from there. That means there's no automatic carryover of those charitable provisions. You have got to be top of the mind at the point of decision, because the score doesn't count until the clock runs out. Plans become unstable at the end of life. We've got to stay connected, stay communicating. By the way, who's likely to make these kinds of gifts? Well, we want to target the 3 C's of childlessness, consistency in giving, and capacity. Childlessness is the single most massively important indicator for who's going to include a gift to charity. This is among those who have will or trust documents, age 55 and above. And you see that those with grandchildren, about 7% are including charity. Married couples with no children or grandchildren, half are including gifts to charity. So 7% compared to half, that's a big difference. And by the way, it's one of the reasons why this baby boom generation is going to drive these charitable dollars so much in estate planning in the future. It's not just that this generation is bigger, it's that they are dramatically more likely to be childless. And so we're already seeing the effects of that in terms of current planning, that among those who have will or trust documents, the propensity to include charity in recent years has just gone up, up, up. And it's because of childlessness and increases in education. How do we, what's the best predictor of who actually leaves a charitable estate gift at death? Well, here's our top 10 predictors. Consistency in giving is number 1. No offspring is number 2. And the only reason no offspring is number 2 is because not very many people have that characteristic. So whereas a lot more people are making charitable gifts. So consistency in making charitable gifts is the number 1 indicator. Their highest ever annual level of giving was an indicator. Consistency in reporting having a funded trust rather than a will is a strong indicator, and I'll mention why that is in just a moment. Women are more likely than men. Having more wealth was helpful, also growing wealth and being unmarried. All right, so the last thing I want to leave you with is to go beyond the will. We're actually seeing a fairly dramatic and consistent drop in the share of people who have will or trust documents. Now, if you combine this with among those who have will or trust documents, what percentage of them are including charity? We've got a very strong downward trend and a very strong upward trend. And if you combine both of those trends, you get a flat line. This is the share of folks who have a charitable beneficiary in their will or trust documents. If they have documents, propensity is going way up, but the likelihood of having documents is going down. It turns out that it's mostly the will document that the propensity is going down, whereas there's a modest increase in the propensity to have funded trusts. Now, one of the things that's important about this that has changed dramatically in the last few years is the ability to add a transfer on death designation to the real estate. Now, why to the home? Why is this a big deal? It's a big deal because you can already put a TOD on your bank account, your stock market account, your IRA, your life insurance. And so that really leaves only the home or other real estate that you can't TOD. Well, back when I graduated from law school in 1994, Missouri, where I graduated from University of Missouri Law School, was the only state that allowed this. You don't care about what the law is in Missouri, but then in the year 2000, it expanded a little bit. 2005 expanded even more. 2017 even more. And here we are today, where almost everything west of the Mississippi, you can add these TOD designations. Why does this make a difference? Well, let's look at this other study where we looked at what ultimately happened to those written and witnessed will documents reported during life. Well, looking at a little over 7,000 decedents who had reported having a signed and witnessed will document, in only 38% of the cases did that document control anything. Now, in most of those scenarios, the heirs indicated, yes, there was a document. No, we didn't use it because most commonly the estate was otherwise transferred. Now, these funded trusts, they're much more likely to control those assets than the will documents. That's one of the reasons why that's a strong indicator as to whether or not somebody's actually going to transfer dollars to charity at death, because often they will have that charitable component in their will document, which literally controls nothing. All right, folks, well, I'm at the end of my time. That's been an hour, and so I want to open it up for opportunity for questions along the way, comments, snide remarks, whatever comes to mind. Please do jump in and let's talk about these things. So, Kate, I'll turn it back over to you.
I hope we aren't getting any side remarks. That was a great presentation, Dr. James. Looks like we have a couple of questions that folks are interested in, so we will hopefully address their burning questions here. So the first one is, somebody's asking a little bit, you've emphasized wills and trusts a lot in this conversation, and so somebody's asking about the validity or the ability to name charities as a beneficiary of their investment accounts or their retirement accounts, and how that might look a little bit different.
Yeah, that's actually a great strategy as a financial advisor, one that we often recommend for folks to do. So that sends the gift directly to the charitable organization, does not have to go through the court process, does not have to go through the probate process. So yes, and in fact, it's one of the simplest ways to include charity or to encourage others to include charity in their estate plan. Sometimes people get very nervous about, oh, I've already done my will document, I want to go through that whole thing again. Hey, all you got to do, add a TOD, transfer on death designation, pay on death designation. You can name the charity in that, and you don't have to change any of your other estate planning documents. In fact, as fundraisers, we would rather people do that, because oftentimes people think they have a gift to charity because they've got a gift in the estate plan, but their estate plan is the will document, and the will document doesn't control anything, because remember, the will document is just a backup document. It's only there in case you have any assets titled solely in the name of the decedent that does not have a pay on death, a transfer on death, a joint ownership with right of survivorship. And so oftentimes it controls nothing. This is particularly important, and we want to open up these conversations with donors about adding designations on an account, because they are so much more powerful. They're guaranteed to control those assets. And we can often do that by, for example, bringing up, any of that retirement account money, the IRA, 401k, that sort of thing, any of that, the family members inherit, they have to pay income taxes on that. And now, in fact, under the new law, they've got to pay those income taxes even faster than before. So it's actually really painful. But any of that money that you name to go to the charitable organization, there's no income taxes on it. So as a financial advisor, the very first dollars I want to make sure are going to the charity are those qualified plan dollars, because it is so much more tax advantageous from an income tax perspective. Again, we run into that. It doesn't have to require that we've got people in that $12 million or $24 million level. This applies to everybody. Your estate might only be $100,000, but if you've got retirement, an IRA, any of that IRA that goes to the family members, they got to pay income taxes on it. But any of it that you send to a charitable organization, no income taxes on it. So in fact, naming a charitable organization as a beneficiary, very powerful strategy, and something we do recommend to clients as financial advisors.
That's a great answer. And I think, it's something we recommend to our charitable organizations a lot. Is it's simple, it's easy to change, right? It doesn't require updating your entire trust, et cetera. So another question here is, for an organization that's just starting out really formalizing their planned giving program, how do you recommend they learn about commitments, and especially how they memorialize commitments from and pledges from their donors? Non-binding pledges, I believe.
Sure, sure. So there's nothing that is going to be more powerful than doing an effective, well-crafted donor survey that starts out asking questions about how people are connected to the cause, what of the different projects that the organization does, what of those are most important to the people, and then along the way includes a question about many people like to support this organization in a variety of different ways. Which of the following might be of interest to you? Gift of check, gift by credit card, gift of monthly withdrawal, gift in a will if you happen to sign a will, gift in honor of a loved one in a will, gift of securities or mutual funds, gift of real estate. Notice what I've done there. I've buried the death question. So we're not leading with death. We put it towards the end. And by the way, if you're interested in doing a donor survey, if you look at what I've shared in the chat there, the 4th book is called The Socratic Fundraiser. It has a chapter all about donor surveys and how you might want to phrase those. That's going to be your best strategy, where you will get a high level of response, especially if you have a good excuse, good reason why you need their answers to these questions. And then you can learn about who's interested in doing this. One of the options will be, I've already done this kind of a gift. And so people will respond to that. That gives you then the opportunity to thank them, memorialize them as a way to motivate others to make these same kinds of gifts.
I think we have time for one more brief question. And this is, I'm looking at all these resources that you've shared. This is my own question, but I think it would be
sure. Go ahead.
Everyone and we will send out these links to everyone.
Great.
I'm going to start somewhere with one of these. Where would you recommend we start?
So if you've got a donor meeting like tomorrow, start with the Socratic Fundraiser. It's the practical one. It's what do you say to a donor, right? If you're interested in the sort of entertainment value of, hey, what's going on with behavioral research and how people think about gifts, charitable giving, that's going to be the storytelling fundraiser. So just depends on what your goals are. Look, I'm a professor, so I want you to read through all 4 of them from start to finish. But yeah, if you've got a donor meeting tomorrow, start with the Socratic Fundraiser. That says, here is what you say when you have that meeting tomorrow.
I have read that and I highly recommend it. So,
well, thanks, Kate.
Yeah. So I just want to thank you again for your time now this afternoon. This has been a really valuable learning experience for me, and I really hope everyone who's here with us this afternoon has had the same experience. And for all of you who are here with us, I hope you'll be able to utilize this information to strengthen some of your planned giving programs. Our staff is here as a resource to offer advice and counsel, particularly when you're engaging in conversations like this. How can your key constituents support your organization in their lifetime and their legacy planning? I also want to mention, while we have you all here today, for those who are interested, we invite you to join us next Thursday, May 5th from 10 to 11 a.m. for another webinar as representatives from Northern Trust, the Foundation's investment advisor, review our main investment portfolio and answer questions about the market. I'm going to drop that in the chat, and we'll also provide it in the follow-up email. If you are interested in joining, please use that link to register. Also, at the end of this program, there will be a brief evaluation that pops up that will help us inform future programming to make sure we're providing resources that are useful for our agency partners and broader community. So please take that for us. Thank you again for being with us, and have a great afternoon. Thanks, everyone.